Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you don't know me, then my name is Lucy and I'm a final year medical student at the University of Nottingham. Back in my third year of medical school, I carried out a research project and wrote a dissertation, and I managed to score 80% in the write-up of my project. And so I thought I'd make this video to give you some tips and advice on how to write a good dissertation. I will start by giving you a bit of a background into sort of my project and how things work at Nottingham Uni, and then I'll take you through each sort of section of a dissertation and give my advice for each of the different sections. And at the end as well, I have some of your questions to answer and also just some general points to make about how to write well. First things first, just to explain a bit of the background. At Nottingham is quite unique in that we do a research project and a dissertation in our third year, which gives us an extra degree. The degree isn't quite the same as a normal Bachelor of Sciences or Bachelor of Arts. It's a BMed Science, so it's a Bachelor of Medical Sciences. It was 10,000 words. Mine was a clinical data study, which means that it wasn't a lab project. I didn't do like an experiment, but I collected data from patients and I used that data to come up with results and discuss them. And basically, if you haven't watched my video where I react to my dissertation results, then you can go and watch that. But essentially, in the write-up of the project, so for my dissertation, I got 80%. And in our Viva, which was a kind of discussion about our results and things, which was worth a lot less than the actual write-up of the project was, I got 75%. And so I got overall 79% for my sort of whole project. This is my project here. I won't show you the title and go into all of that. I got it printed because I was really proud of it and I wanted to keep it forever. So let me go through all the different sections of the dissertation and just give you any advice I can. I'm not an expert, I've only written one dissertation. So first of all, the introduction. This is the bit where you're kind of reviewing what the literature says so far about your topic, and you're trying to convince the reader that your project is important and it's going to add something to the knowledge that we have already. I think people struggle a lot with starting the introduction, and if I'm honest, I think it was probably the section that took me the longest, because it is just that starting point. And what I would say is just get on and write stuff down, read articles, put some information in. It will be something that you will definitely revisit again and again. And to be honest, even when I'd finished my whole dissertation, I was probably still tweaking things in my introduction, because it's really important that you set the reader up for your entire project. And what I would say is that you need to read widely for the introduction, but you don't want to make the mistake of just reading really widely and having loads of references, but not really getting into the depths of what's important in that topic. If you've watched my video where I talk about how to write a first class university essay, then this is something I talk about a lot in that video, so go and watch that as well if you want some more sort of advice. Because I think what you need to do is, when you're reading articles and you're learning about your subject, you want to really become a kind of expert in it. You want to come across that you know what all those really important studies are and you know what they showed, but you've also looked at the more niche studies and you found the finer details. When you're reading studies, rather than just looking straight at the conclusion and adding that into your work, think about how they actually came to that conclusion, whether their methods were actually the best, what sort of limitations they might have, and if they sort of make suggestions of things that would be useful to look at in the future, or things that their study, they could have done differently, then think about them and think, okay, what is my study offering that their study might not be? Because I think that's what you want in the introduction. You want to be guiding the reader through what we know already, and then sort of introducing them to what you might be able to offer into this area of research. And hopefully then when you come to your discussion, it will link really well back to the introduction, because you can then show the reader, look, I thought this study might be helpful, and actually look, it has filled a gap. So then how do you actually find the right studies? How do you find the information that you need for the introduction to get yourself going? Well, the thing that I would suggest here is to use the big sort of review studies, or like meta-analysis, because they're ones that they look at loads of different studies and they combine them all together to get one sort of main conclusion. And so from there you can kind of pick out all of the studies that they've looked at and sort of follow them down a little rabbit hole and go down all these different routes to look at all these different studies. Like, they're a good sort of gateway into all of the other articles that are out there. So find those kind of big meta-analysis or big sort of review papers. Another thing that people might find difficult is collecting information, how to actually transfer all of these things you're reading into a dissertation. And now I didn't necessarily use the best method, but it did actually really work for me because it stopped me getting confused. And what I did is when I was reading a paper, I would just literally copy and paste. Don't worry, I didn't plagiarise, didn't keep this in my actual project, but I copy and pasted things that I thought were useful, so maybe conclusions or interesting points they made, and I just put in a big Word document, I put the title of the paper, and I copy and pasted all the things I wanted from the paper. And then I knew that I wouldn't have to go back and read it again because I just copy and pasted all the bits I wanted to use. So when I came to writing it, yes, I had a lot of copy and pasted work that I then had to sift through and, put into my own words and change around. But it meant that everything I needed was just in one document. And I didn't want to start sort of putting things into my own words because then I might forget what was in my own words and what was copy and pasted. That was what I did. Wouldn't necessarily work for everyone. I just really wanted to get started. I just wanted to copy things in and get moving. So on to the methods section. This section, I know I said the introduction probably took me the longest to write, but this section probably took me the longest to figure out. You might be lucky enough to get a statistician who helps you with your analysis and things, or if you're doing a lab project then it will probably be a lot simpler because you'll just literally be able to write what you did in the lab. But mine, oh my god, basically I had to use a lot of stats, and I'd read a lot of articles and I'd become very familiar with the sort of statistical tests that people used, but I was a bit of a perfectionist with mine and I wanted it to be mathematically correct. And so, there's sort of statistical tests a lot of people probably would have heard of. If you've done like A-level maths, you would have heard of like chi-squared. Even in A-level biology, I think we learned about chi-squared. But I didn't want to just use those sort of more simple ones that I knew about already if they weren't actually really appropriate for the data. And so I did a lot of research into different statistical tests and which ones were right to use and the conditions that had to be met to be able to use these. And I didn't have a statistician, and that's why I had to basically Google a lot of things. And I remember having a lot of late nights where I was like, I'm not going to go to bed until I've figured out what statistical test I'm using. And yeah, it did take a long time. But then when I had my viva, when you discuss your paper with someone with experience in that field, he basically said to me, have you had a statistician do this for you, like tell you what test to use? And I said no. And I think that was something that really impressed him. And so I think, really taking the time to consider that part of things does make a project a lot better than one that's just kind of used just the things that they're familiar with. And like when I read it now, I don't really understand my analysis. Like that's how I feel like I was in such a hole. I just got so into it. Not in that I was necessarily enjoying it, but I was like, you know what, I'm just going to have to do this. And I just committed a lot of time, over a short space of time, to getting it done. And I used SPSS as well to do all of my analysis. And figuring out how to use that in itself took a good couple of weeks. Moving on to the results section, there's not much I would say about results, to be honest, because ultimately it was just, my results were just very concise and clear, I think. I just stated what the results were. You don't go into discussing them. You don't sort of have an opinion of them in the results section. You are just stating them to the reader and then putting them into tables or charts or whatever suits your data. This was a bit of a risk, to be honest, but I tried to make my tables quite kind of, not pretty, but I tried to make it very obvious what the sort of positive findings were and the negative findings. So I did highlight boxes and things in the table so that it was really clear what was going on. And so it wasn't just a bog standard black and white, just numbers in a table. I don't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing, to be honest. It might have been really useful for the reader. It might have, been a sort of weak point because maybe it wasn't as scientific, but especially when I was working through the results myself and figuring out what was going on, those sort of tables really helped me where they had colour and I was sort of, highlighting bits. So then on to the discussion, which is where you're discussing your results, you're comparing them to other studies, you're coming up with conclusions, you're linking things back to your introduction. This was the bit I was most worried about writing, and I almost dreaded throughout the whole writing process, because this was to me the bit that really counted and really showed what I'd actually learn from doing my study. In the end, it wrote itself. It was really weird. I remember it was in the Christmas holidays and I'd finished all the other sections. I mean, I ended up tweaking things a lot, but I'd finished the first draft of them all. And then I came to writing the discussion. I typed discussion at the top of the page. And then I just kind of did it. It was really weird and it didn't take very long. I obviously then went back through it and changed things, added things. But the first kind of draft of it and the things I wanted to show the reader just happened really naturally. And I think it was just because in that moment in time I was so absorbed in the topic of my project that I knew all of the papers I wanted to refer to and sort of compare to. I knew papers that had agreed with mine or papers that had disagreed with mine. I knew my results really, really well because I'd spent so long writing them all out and putting them into tables, and I just found the drawing conclusions part really easy. And that's why I say the introduction is so important, because if you are really familiar with your field of study, then it's actually quite easy to see where your study just fits in with all of the others, or where it doesn't fit in and where it actually shows something different. If you're just starting writing your dissertation and you're worrying about that already, then I would just not worry about it. The more you become immersed in your project and the more you just read, in order to do a literature review at the beginning almost, you will find that you just actually know a lot about your subject, and it's actually not so bad coming up with some conclusions. So now I'm just going to talk about some general advice I have just for writing a big piece of work. Firstly, the structure of what you say is really important, I think. If I give you my project, for example, my project was looking at a new cognitive assessment tool to be used for patients with dementia. You want to sort of take the reader on this journey of right from the beginning, so the introduction. If you just go in and say, there's this new cognitive tool that's been brought out and I want to see how it works and I think it will be good, it's kind of, you want to take things slowly, and you want to, everything you say you want to be building on what you've said before. So I started my project by literally explaining, how prevalent is dementia and how important is dementia as a problem, and how do we actually go about assessing and diagnosing dementia, and why is diagnosing dementia important? What can be gained from diagnosing dementia earlier? So before I'd even mentioned cognitive assessments, really, I'm just sort of putting the reader in my space that I'm going to be talking about. And then you sort of start to introduce, what cognitive assessments do we use to diagnose it, and how good are they? Do they work? Do they not work? And so I'm bringing up these ideas in the reader's head of, okay, so we've got these tools that we use, but there's some downfalls in them. Okay, what are we going to do about that? Then I introduce the idea of my cognitive assessment tool and introduce why it might be better and why it might fill some of these gaps that we've got, and how it might improve the diagnosis of dementia as a whole. And I've already explained to the reader why the diagnosis of dementia early is really important. And so when I then come to say that I think my cognitive assessment tool will help us diagnose dementia earlier, it makes sense because I've already gone into the detail of why that's so important. It's probably something that you do instinctively, but I think it's worth really thinking about and thinking, if I just sat down to read this and I had no idea, let's say for my project, if you didn't even know what dementia was, would reading this project, would I get to the end of it and would I then think, okay, I get it, I get why this study was done? And that's ultimately it. Something else that I think makes or breaks a piece of writing is the flair of the writer. Word choice is good vocabulary. These things I think are underestimated of how important they are. It's something that really helps me, which isn't necessarily the advice you should take. Some people probably don't do this, but I will never use first person. I'll always try and sound like I'm a voice of reason above everything. Some people probably write really well and they do say I, I think this and I found this, but something that is, for me, it's a massive no-no because I think it makes my writing sound really not as sophisticated. And it might be difficult because when you come to sort of bringing conclusions to the table, you want to say, I think this, and you want to give your point of view, but there are ways you can phrase that making it sound, you know, very assertive, like it's your idea, without actually saying I. The next thing I want to talk about is cutting down words. Obviously I was like thousands of words over, because when you're first writing it, you do just want to include as much as possible. So I don't think you should restrict yourself. You do want to get all of those ideas out there. When it comes to having to cut down to fit your word limit, you'd be surprised how many words you can cut out from just changing the arrangement of your sentences. And that's important, because if you're just going to cut out whole sections, or you're going to cut out whole ideas or concepts, then you're actually going to lose a lot of the content of your dissertation. And what I found with mine is that I wanted it to be packed full of content and valuable information, and I didn't want it to be waffly or, you know, over-explanatory and flowery or anything. So just, yeah, before you go and like cut out a whole paragraph because you're way over the word count, go through the whole thing and just change the sentence order and condense sentences together. So, referencing. This is something that I was also terrified about, because I thought it's going to take me forever to type out every single reference. No, it didn't. It was really easy. What I did was use EndNote. You can get an account with EndNote. It's called EndNote Online or something. And then you can connect that to your Microsoft Word. And basically every time you're reading a paper, you can either, there's two ways you can do it. You can either manually input the reference into EndNote, which is like bank of all of your references. So you can sort of add one in, and then you can put in the title, the date, the publisher, whatever. You can put all of the details in, and then it will be stored in your bank of references. Or what I did, I used the university library, and from there's literally a button where you can just click EndNote Online, like there's an actual link to EndNote Online, and it automatically imports the reference into EndNote. So basically, it was 2 clicks of a button for me to put a reference in. It was 1 click to get the reference into EndNote, which is my bank of references, and then in my Word document, literally as you're typing, you can click EndNote, you can click like insert citation, and then you can search for the reference you want, and it comes out of all your references. Click on the one you want and it gets inserted. And I use the numerical method, I can't remember what it's called, Vancouver or something. So I would insert it, it would come up with the number, and then it would put it at the end as well in a list of references, and it would be perfectly like cited and everything. And it was literally amazing, because then I was just adding citations everywhere because it was so easy to do it, and it didn't drain my time and energy typing them all out. So that is something I'd really recommend doing. So I'm going to go on now to sort of answering some of your questions. So a few questions about sort of how much work is it, how much time does it take and things. I think it's really dependent on the way you work. I much prefer getting things out of the way, so I worked quite hard at the beginning to get sort of my intro done, collected my data, then I really quickly tried to write my methods and results, and then I just sort of did my discussion. So we started ours in October, November time, and I finished mine in December. So it took between a month and a half and 2 months, I think. I finished mine over the Christmas holidays when I just bashed out my discussion, and then we had to give them in January, sort of midway through January I think it was. So then for those last sort of couple of weeks I just was reading over it and just tweaking things, but I'd finished it by the end of Christmas holidays, I think. So then supervisor meetings, how to get the most out of them. Supervisors can really vary in how much input they have in your project and how much help they give you. Supervisors there to give you guidance, but they're not there to help you write it, really. So things that I found useful to ask were more like very specific questions. So things that more are like factual that I need to know. So, you know, where did this patient's data set actually come from? You know, who were these patients? What timescale was this done? So like finding out the factual information you need to know to make your methods section of your dissertation really accurate is important. And then I'd ask her things like, what should I call this group of patients who have this specific type of dementia? What medical term best sort of categorises them? So I always came to her with very specific questions. Other questions about how many times did I rewrite it? Well, it was never finished until I handed it in. That's the only way I can put it. So I never wrote a section and thought, this is it, it's finished, I'm not going to change it anymore. everything, you know, I was always very open-minded that I could change things. Even if I really loved what I'd written, if I then was, you know, I found another study that I thought was really important, I would go back and put it in places and stuff. So I think you need to have quite a dynamic approach to the project, that it's not a case of writing the introduction, finishing it, putting it to one side, and then writing the methods, finishing it and putting it to one side. You always want to be revisiting what you've done. Only when you've actually submitted it can it then be completely finished, I think. I've said a lot in this video. I hope it wasn't all just waffle. I hope it was useful in some way. Another takeaway message I will just end the video on. What you really want to bring in your dissertation is a really unique, independent, critical voice. So you're really showing that you're reading articles and you're looking at your own work and you're really thinking about it and coming up with conclusions. You're not just kind of making it all fit in. It's very easy to just get to the end of it and kind of be like, oh look, my results showed this and this is what these studies showed, so there you go. You really want to be thinking, what wasn't so good about my study? And yeah, I might have got the same results as other people because of this reason, but then I also might have got the same results in a different way, and I don't know, you want to really be exploring it in a deeper way. And yeah, you don't just want to be echoing what other papers have said, what other people have already done. You want to really be coming up with your own ideas. And yeah, I will leave you on that note. And just, yeah, best of luck to anyone who's writing a dissertation. I know when you start it, it just feels like an impossible task, but you will just finish it and you'll feel so proud that you've done it. Remember to subscribe to my channel to join me on my journey to becoming a doctor. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you very soon. Bye!